Want to talk about the best time to plant switchgrass, and there's a few variables that you need to really consider when you're planting switchgrass, and really for you, which might be different than someone else, what time you should plant switchgrass. And that boils down to the amount of moisture, the amount of weeds, and the quality of your seed that you're actually planting, because there can be very big differences in all of those depending on your personal conditions and your location. And bottom line is number one, you have to take care of your weeds. Now, I like frost seeding. Frost seeding makes sure that if you have a high hard count of seed, that it germinates. It also makes sure that if you have a soft seed, it's going to germinate, but you have to control the weeds. And so if you control your weeds and you frost seed, which is great to do, then you're going to do really well. So what I've recommended in the past is you frost seed, you get one spraying of simazine. I'm going to talk about 3 sprayings here that are critical for you. 1 spraying of simazine, and then a spraying of 2,4-D and Roundup, and then also another spraying of Roundup or glyphosate, same thing, about 4 weeks after. And so I'm looking at, you spray simazine before spring green up. Spring green up takes place, let's say that's middle of April, end of April in a lot of locations. You're getting a good spraying of 2,4-D and Roundup, and then a month later, you're getting a spraying of Roundup. Now, on that month later, if your switchgrass is starting to germinate, then you could be in big trouble, because it's going to germinate, pop up, even if it's a 1/4 inch high, you're going to kill the switchgrass. So you have to be really careful on that. So a lot of times when you're frosting on switchgrass, you're assuming the ground's already open, and you've either had one chemical control the year before, or it was a food plot where it was chemically controlled. So that area already has had a chemically controlled application of at least one time. So that gets into simazine and then 2,4-D and Roundup. But again, it averages 3 sprayings, so you still have at least 1 spraying from the previous fall or late summer before, and then you have the simazine and then a shot. Again, 3 sprayings, if you look at that. And then that frost-seeded switchgrass will do great. And you still have time to spray simazine and then 2,4-D and Roundup on that, because it's going to take a while to germinate. A good guide, if the switchgrass is germinating in your area, is just look at the local cornfields. If you see corn is germinated, then switchgrass is right behind it. So if you're seeing corn germinated out 3 or 4 inches, you really want to reconsider about spraying at that time. But if the corn is just sitting in the soil and it hasn't germinated yet, that's a good test to say, you know what, we can spray and we're going to be okay. But you have to have those 3 sprayings. Why spray chemicals at all? You can throw switchgrass into a field and just keep mowing. Switchgrass will eventually come into some appreciation in that field. But in my experience, you can't just mow out the weeds. You just can't burn out the weeds. At some point, you have to practice some type of chemical control to get the weeds out. And if you don't get the weeds out, I was just at a client the other day, and it was in Michigan. He planted switch all the same way, but it's crazy on certain portions of the field that had weeds and others that didn't. You plant the switch, and in one area, the switch is 6 inches high after he mowed in August sometime. So 6 inches high going in the spring. It's still all standing up, but it's got a lot of weeds in it. And then over in this location, it's 15 to 18 inches high, but not a lot of weeds, and are hardly any weeds at all. And so you can see just right there, everything else the same. The weeds really take, those stalks were actually thinner. The switch is a lot shorter. It was all mowed at the same time, all planted at the same time, same weed control. But the presence of weeds greatly diminishes volume, height, and the stiffness of that stand, the height of the stand, and the quality of the stand. That's no different than food plots. That's what happens when you have weeds going into your fall food plots. They just greatly diminish the volume to the point where there's a lot of 10-acre fields out there that have an acre or 2 in food, because there's 50% weeds. Those take away volume, and that diminishes the overall quality and volume and height and actually attractiveness of the rest that is growing in that plot. Deer don't want to, think of it this way, even just a food plot. Let's say you have 2 acres of food spread out over an entire 10-acre field, and as far as volume goes, those deer don't want to move 10, 15, 20 feet at a time to find another morsel. They want to stand in one spot and just consume it down, and they know that every time they move when they're feeding, that's a risk level to them. So they want to sit in one place and eat and have a lot of volume. And it's no different with switchgrass in terms of cover. You want to have that thick stand, and so that's why you don't mow it or burn it out. You have to chemically control it. Now, it's not to say you can't have a decent stand to switch, but for all the time and resources and space that you're putting into it and acreage that you're putting into it, then I'd rather do my best with something, anything, whether it's food plots or switchgrass. Percentage of hard seed, this is a big thing. Dylan has a 20% rule, and I think you could expand that to more like 30%, 35, so it's not more than a third. But you don't want more than a third of your bag of switchgrass to be hard seed. Hard seed has to go through frost seeding. So if you want to frost seed that, and you frost seed that amount, and you've taken chemical control the year before, that's the whole idea of frost seed, because you already had chemical controlled, you frost seed it, you hit it with simazine before spring green up, you hit it with 2,4-D and Roundup after spring green up when the weeds are 8-10 inches high, you're gonna get a great stand. But with soft seed count, like our seed that we have right now is 80% soft seed. What that means is there's 80% of that, of the portion that's germination. So if we have a 90% germination in that seed bag, 80% of that 90% is available for growth right away, or 90% soft seed count. So if those higher soft seed counts are in there, then you're going to actually get a high percentage of seed to germinate, and you don't need to go through frost and freeze. So that switch is available right away to germinate as long as there's moisture. So that gives you a lot of time, because then I'm not even throwing, me personally this year, I'm not even throwing switchgrass on the ground until probably the 3rd, 4th week of May. That's before some late May, June showers. I'm going to put it on chemically controlled ground where I've sprayed simazine on, then 2,4-D Roundup, 2,4-D Roundup. So I've gotten 3 sprayings. I'm going to wait 7 to 10 days because I don't want that 2,4-D in the ground, because again, the switchgrass is going to germinate in about 10 days to 2 weeks at most. And so I don't want there to be 2,4-D in the ground. You throw that switchgrass on the ground at the same day you spray, and then the spray is not going to kill it. It's the germinating switchgrass, because there's a lot of soft seed, it grows right away, that's coming up into the stand. I hope that makes sense. So really, if you have soft seed, for me personally here in southeast Minnesota, I'm going to wait till end of May to actually broadcast my switch. That'll give me 2 high quality sprayings before that time, along with the simazine. So I'll get 2 sprayings on the weeds that are actually left over and growing, so that by the time I throw that switchgrass on the ground later in the year, later in May, then I'm going to have seed that's available for germination right away to a high percentage. And as soon as there's moisture on the ground for about 10 days, it's going to germinate and grow quick. And I've seen it grow a lot faster than that within a week. If you get hard pounding showers, get a good thunderstorm that's and the ground stays damp for a while, especially if there's got a little clay in it so it's holding moisture, you're going to get some great germination in June. We have a corner switchgrass field out here that's about 1.5 acres in size. Got incredible germination rates on that, and that was towards middle of June, early June, because I planted it right before a bunch of rain, and we actually did really well with that and had great germination rates. So then it all boils down to moisture, and that's the last step here. Just need 10 days to 2 weeks on soft seed to actually germinate, and I've seen it even less than 10 days. So you have to get moisture on it. That goes back to people get a hold of me and, well, you said to germinate at 58 degrees soil temperature and it's not growing yet. Well, I look and you haven't had drought, you haven't had rain in a month, 5 weeks. So just because the soil temperature is there doesn't mean it's going to germinate. I think some people used to think in the past that the switchgrass had gone through adequate stratification, going through lots of frost and freeze, so it's available for germination. As soon as the soil temperature hits, it pops up. And no, it has to actually germinate with moisture, just like every other seed. So you still have to wait for it to be at the soil temperature, plus get good moisture. And that can happen a month later, then the soil temperature hits that temperature. Just because it hits doesn't mean it's going to pop up right away. So you have to have germination, but it doesn't take very long on soft seed. And that's why my favorite time for planting switch would really be, frost seeding's great if you've previously controlled with chemical the previous year, at least one time, then you follow the 2 steps, that's 3 spraying still. But my favorite time, just because for planting, I can go out and work on fields right now that are full of grass and weeds, and by the time 2 months later rolls around and I've had 2 quality sprayings of 2,4-D and Roundup on it, there's not much left. I can have a high percentage, almost all of it, get right on the ground because the weeds have diminished, dried, and blown away, and they weren't appreciable to begin with in height, so I don't have a lot of weed debris. A lot of weed debris that you look in a field is from last year. it really dries up, turns to dust, and blows away. So a lot of times you can stand there and just kick it with your boot and you're down to soil. And so it gives you the option of spraying with Simazine in the spring before spring cleanup, hitting it with 2,4-D and Roundup when the weeds are 8 to 10 inches high, and then 4 weeks later hit it again, wait a week, throw your seed down, and you'll get a great catch. You really don't care if there's a lot of moisture in the end of May, early June, middle of June, end of June. That switchgrass will sit in the soil. It's very hardy. And as soon as you get enough rain, it's going to take off. You'll get a great stand because you've addressed the weeds. Hopefully you've purchased seed like ours that has a good soft seed count. We've seen seed out there recently that's over 70% hard seed, and I've seen as high as 80%, where there's really not much available to germinate in that bag. What happens then, and the reason Dylan has this 20% rule, and I would say, you know, at least 33% you only want in hard seed in a bag, is because then weeds will always come back in the field. You can spray it 3 times, weeds will always come back eventually, whether it's 2 months later, 3 months later, it's going to come in this growing season. So if you don't have a very high soft seed count in percentage, then you don't have a lot of switchgrass that's going to grow until the following spring. For that, you have a lot of open soil that's not being taken over by switchgrass, it's being taken over by weeds. And when your switchgrass does germinate the following spring, which it will do, it's very hardy seed, then it's got that weed competition, and you're going to lose a high percentage of your germination to actual ground cover and shading because those weeds are established, and you have a lot more steps in weed control, sprayings, and mowings to take care of in subsequent years to eventually get to a good stand that might not take place for 5 or 6 years if you had done it right in the first place. So I hope that makes sense. That's why we contract to make sure we have very high soft seed percentages. That costs us more money, therefore our switchgrass is more expensive. And you can tell if someone's making a lot on their seed, their margins anyways, if they have high hard seed counts, because that switch is half as much to buy, trust me, and put in the bag. It's nice to look at those numbers and say, wow, we can sell it for this, and we buy it for this down here, but then we're giving you a crappy product, and we don't want to do that. So again, my favorite time to plant, just for all things considered, is to actually buy good soft seed, make sure you have those 3 chemical kills on. For me, it'll be the middle to end of May this year that I plant, and I'll get all my switchgrass in, I'll get it weed free, we'll get great germination rates, and so there's still time to plant. You know, we're obviously, again, we're not putting our seed down to mid-May till early May. We'll always have switch on hand, and we don't want to run out of seeds ever. So if you're looking at this and you're thinking, boy, it's too late for me to plant switch this year, heck, I'm not even planting for more than a month later. So you still have plenty of time to order. In the case of our seed, we send it out within 1 to 2 days at the latest, usually the next day. We get it in a box and out the door and to you as fast as possible. And that's why we have Wes working here full time. Jen ships seed too. So we have many hands that sees us, can answer your questions, and hope that this makes sense to you, because there's still a lot of time. We're just now getting started and still weeks away from my favorite time to plant switchgrass every single spring. Now, I don't know if you've checked out our main website lately, whitetailhabitatsolutions.com, but we've really had a lot going on, including hats, books, our web class, and certainly our new seed company, WHS Wildlife Blends. When you click on seed on our site, it'll take you right to our brand new site for the seed company. We have all 12 blends available. So check it all out, though. I encourage you, I appreciate you checking it out. Whether you buy anything or not, really appreciate you visiting the site and seeing what's going on, and continue to watch because we have big things coming later this year.